Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma. I am flying solo today without any of my colleagues or cohorts, my usual partners in crime. It's that, dead time of summer where there's hardly any news except for, last week where the Pittsburgh Steelers made this blockbuster trade, swapping Minkah Fitzpatrick in a draft pick for another draft pick in tight end Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey from the Miami Dolphins. And it got me thinking this week, as we're about 2 weeks away from training camp. I think we're about maybe 20-ish days away from an actual football game. I know it's not an actual football game, but the Hall of Fame game, the first preseason game. The NFL season is here. For better or for worse, though, the Pittsburgh Steelers are an entirely different team than they have been over the last few years. And myself and Brian went really in depth on the trade for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith and Minkah Fitzpatrick and whatnot in the last episode. So I don't want to be a broken record about that. This episode's a little more different just because of some of the things I see people talk about, either on the radio, on the TV, social media, and otherwise. It's strange because this isn't your father's or grandfather's Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, I don't want to be a broken record on some of the things we just went over last week. If you missed Brian's voice, go back to the other episode right before this one, as we cover a lot of that stuff a little more in depth. We're going to have some training camp previews coming up around the corner, maybe some other fan service things, as the preseason can be a little bit dry, or there's just, training camp itself it's going to be exciting to see when you get everybody on the field, but not everybody's on the field every single day. There's, I don't think the NFL uses the word load management. We know that's like an NBA or a baseball thing, but they definitely do this during training camp. Some of your stars are not going to be out there every day. And speaking of one of them, TJ Watt and his contract, I believe that's going to get done. They're talking about whether or not he's going to get like 5 years, $200 million. Myles Garrett's in the $40 million range. We know some of the other edge rushers that are seeking that kind of money. This guy's been a great generational elite player. I could see him in that category. I don't know if he's going to get 5 years, but, TJ could play through his mid-30s, I'm sure, knock on wood. And that's one of the things that really got me thinking about the context of this episode. And it's not his contract and whether there's any squabbles or anything like that. If you have followed the Pittsburgh Steelers for longer than an hour or two, you know that they only handle these contracts around training camp when they already report to Latrobe. So if you see TJ doing the, sit in so he doesn't get fined or whatever, just his own little workouts on the side, he did that before. And to be honest, when you're not talking about his contract, you go back to, the last couple of years at training camp at St. Vincent's College, and sometimes he's just doing his own thing anyways. These guys aren't always on the field every single moment of every single training camp practice. So when you get out there for the first one, which, the first week, they don't even wear pads. They'll get into pads the last week of July, I believe, on that Tuesday. And then that leads into like Friday Night Lights, where that Friday they'll definitely be in pads. I don't know if they'll be in pads the Thursday before the Friday Night Lights at the Memorial Stadium in Latrobe, or Saturday, definitely probably not. And if you've got guys like Cam Hayward or TJ Watt or whatever participating in Friday Night Lights, they're probably not doing much on Saturday. So it's kind of hard sometimes to gauge everything all together. But there's going to be some new faces at camp. And this is like way different. I saw somebody post and they're like, well, what did the Steelers look like 5 years ago? How many of these players are still around? They were talking about like the draft. And I scratched my head, because depending on where you're selected in the draft really depends on how long of a career you have in the National Football League. I'm going to go over to somebody completely different who used to be a former Steeler, who's now with the Los Angeles Chargers, and that's Bud Dupree. And he's been kind of relegated to a backup who's seen some decent amount of playing time, not only in rotation, but due to injuries in front of him where he's had to start. And he's still kind of hanging around in the NFL, but he's an afterthought for anybody with the when it comes to playing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. In fact, he was drafted a few years before TJ Watt came on the scene. In fact, the 2015 draft, whereas TJ Watt gets selected in 2017, it's going to be the 11th season for Bud Dupree, his second with the Chargers. You know, he bounced around. He was with the Steelers until 2020. That's a year where they put the franchise tag on him for $16 million. Seems like a bargain now when we're talking about the Garretts and the Watts and everybody in the world becoming the $40 million guys. They're almost as much as the quarterbacks. Remember, the league is all about quarterbacks and who chases the quarterbacks. And of course, the quarterback going back 5 years. We go back to 2021. Dupree's not on this roster, right? But that doesn't mean he was a bad draft pick. It doesn't mean he wasn't a contributor with the Steelers. One double-digit sack season, 11 and a half sacks in 2019. 2020 and 21 and all the COVID stuff and pandemic stuff that kind of played around with things in the league too. But he got hurt. He signed a big contract, got hurt when he was at Tennessee, bounced back a little bit with Atlanta. He had 6 sacks last season, and statistically, he didn't start a single game for the Chargers and still kind of hanging around. So these are the kind of players where a lot of times it's like, what have you done for me lately? What is the recency bias when it comes to some of this stuff? And again, this isn't your grandfather's Steelers. This isn't your father's Steelers. Kevin Colbert, when he was still around as the general manager, I'm going to look back at this 2021 draft here in a second and some of his picks. There's some criticism to Kevin Colbert, but this is the way the Steelers, the blueprint had been laid since Chuck Noll was the coach. And just thinking about, 1969 and going into the 70s Steelers dynasty, Steelers going to be announcing a throwback jersey here right around another week or so. As camp goes to break, they're going to make this big announcement also. And I'm wondering, do we get to 1969, like the white pants with the black stripe? I believe that was just that 1 year that they did it. Some people are talking about the Batman with the wing and everything on it. I don't want those junky jerseys. Bumblebees, you can bring them back. Just don't break the puke colored pants. More than likely, it's going to be that 75th anniversary jersey, because I think they're going to want to do the whole alternate helmet thing that everyone else is doing now. Probably a gold helmet, maybe something that kind of looks like almost like a Pittsburgh Pirates, kind of just one stripe on the sleeves. If you remember, very similar to what the Color Rush is that they are wearing now, minus the gold helmet. And the Color Rush has the numbers on the shoulder pads as well. But block numbers. The block numbers are sexy, right? But I digress. Man, thinking about that, I think about Ben Roethlisberger with both of those, the Bumblebee and those 75th anniversary uniforms. I know the Color Rush was still around when Ben was playing. Antonio Brown was still playing with the Color Rush as well. So we'll see what they end up doing with the jerseys. And I think we may do a whole other segment on that, because just who do you buy? I've got so many jerseys now in my closet over the last few years that are irrelevant, and I think that's where some of this kind of comes from, because I look at this 2021 roster and I see like somebody like Chase Claypool, and I'm like, I forgot I had that dude's uniform. I actually was one of the suckers who bought one, right? He didn't stick around too long. I know people are feeling that way now with George Pickens, but it's an eternity in the National Football League. Depending on where you get drafted, your longevity, a first rounder, you're going to stick around a little bit longer, because many teams have probably looked at or scouted that player. They think maybe a lot of times the top picks are usually going to the teams that were the poor teams that had the worst records in the league the year before. You look at that this year, the Tennessee Titans, for example, Chicago Bears over the last few seasons, and they change coaching staffs, they change front offices, people have different visions and whatnot. That player is probably going to bounce around a little bit. Devin Bush is a perfect example coming from the Steelers. I mentioned Bud Dupree, but Bud Dupree had 6 solid productive years with the Pittsburgh Steelers. 6, right? Yeah, I was just looking at Dupree's stuff. So he had also had the 5th-year option on him as well, I believe. So, the salary caps and stuff, sometimes everybody just goes and they're free agents. But the average... Getting back to my point, the average career in the NFL is about 3 years. You might get 4 if you play through your full rookie contract. Many of these guys do. Beyond that, you may get a 5th-year option that keeps you with your original team. If you don't, then you're scouring the free agent market. You may get picked up somewhere else. If you're like a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick and you've just been kind of a journeyman, a role player, someone who hasn't gotten playing time, you're probably out. entirely. You may be someone, I look at somebody like, and I'm not saying he's going anywhere anytime soon, but I look at like a Connor Hayward. He reminds me of a Jalen Samuels, if you want to go for a throwback on that name. And in fact, was Samuels on this roster? He was not. He was already gone by that time. But Benny Snell was here in 2021. It's crazy to me. And the Steelers, for better or worse, if you could get one or two players from a draft class to become long-term solutions, remember, you've got about 5 to 10 contracts that are really the top ones, and then everything else, it's always constant change. If you pop in an old version of Madden and you go and you're like, holy cow, Ben Roethlisberger was the quarterback his final year, 2021, right? And the Steelers that season were an interesting group, 9-7-1. They had the tie against the Detroit Lions at home. That was the one where Mason Rudolph ends up getting notice that he's going to play overnight. Ben is ruled out due to COVID. It was rainy. It was gross. This was before the Lions were actually as well thought of as they are now, and a competitor and a potential Super Bowl contender. Back then, they were still trying to find their way. They had just gotten Jared Goff in the swap with Matt Stafford and such and all that. So not to belabor that too much, that game, I remember it as just Deontay Johnson with a fumble, Pat Freiermuth with a fumble. And that's kind of intriguing too, because you look at that draft class in 21, Najee Harris, no longer with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but he was a workhorse. He was an Iron Man. He was somebody who played or appeared in damn near every game he was available to be a part of. And 1,000 yards every season. I know it's still not the accolade that it used to be now with the 17 game seasons, as we have it, that extra expanded one game. They're looking to kick that out to 18 now. Even I wonder just the health and longevity of players. And that's another thing. Football is very physical. Guys aren't playing 15, 20 years like they are in baseball or basketball, particularly if they're stars, right? Pat Freiermuth, the second round pick from that year, obviously he's still around. And when I get to talking about other players and how the Steelers build rosters, sometimes that was kicking the tires on former first round picks themselves. Eric Ebron was his running mate back then, a very kind of a low cost option in free agency, which the Steelers are very much so used to. The way they're doing this now is they went after and traded for John L. Smith. They're making trades. And they've got a lot of draft picks. They could have as many as 11 or 12 next season. But to go out and get a Pro Bowl tight end, the Steelers have been trying to do this for as long as I can remember. And it's nothing against Pat Freiermuth, but it seems like they're always trying to have somebody else there as a reserve. But I'm going to go through some of these positions on the old team and just kind of reflect to the new 2025 Steelers. It's going to be very interesting to see what these Steelers look like when they get to training camp. But the rest of the picks that year, obviously, we remember Kendrick Green, a center who did not last very long outside his rookie season. Colbert was trying to patch up the offensive line for Ben Roethlisberger. You had a lot of your stalwarts already gone, like Marquise Pouncey. David DeCastro ended up hurt and out of football right around this same time as well. Marcus Gilbert had wound down and then ended up getting traded. Alejandro Villanueva doesn't end up returning at some point around this time. So you have like Dan Moore was also brought in. He wasn't intended to start that season, but Zach Banner had gotten hurt. Chuks Okorafor moved over to a different position. Buddy Johnson, a 4th round pick, a linebacker, didn't last very long. Isaiah Loudermilk still kind of hanging around there, and as a contributor, a role player, or whatnot. So you got some pretty good production. And then of course there was Quincy Roche, Trey Norwood, Presley Harvin, and Presley Harvin, Ray Guy Award winner. They were looking for a good punter, and the Steelers have been looking for a good punter for a long time. I thought Corliss Waitman did great last year, but he may be forced out due to the contract of Cameron Johnston, who is now healthy and ready to go. I'm excited to see him in training camp this year and see if he does what he did last year, because it's not often you look at a punter and you go, wow. Like, he was doing some wow stuff over on the far fields at St. Vincent. So, but Harris, you got solid 4 years out of Najee Harris. Najee Harris played behind some really bad offensive lines. Pat Freiermuth is still there. He's been extended. You've gotten or received at least a draft pick for Kendrick Green. Should receive a compensatory pick because Dan Moore went and signed that huge contract with the Houston Texans this offseason. And Dan Moore, for all the faults and for everything that everyone says about him, that guy was very reliable, at least in the availability department. He wasn't like often injured or missed games. Maybe he played with some dings and dents. Was he above the line where we would want him to be that type of star, somebody they would have kept? And that's the reason why they brought on Broderick Jones and even Troy Fautanu as draft picks in the last few years. And we'll see how those guys work out. But the whole point is like, you even go to the year before that, Chase Claypool, he was gone. And you had Alex Highsmith, Anthony McFarland, Kevin Dotson, Antoine Brooks, Carlos Davis. And people say, well, the reason the Steelers are in the position they're in is because they draft terrible, blah, 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 blah. I was going back and looking at like the Eagles in 2021, who had a very similar record to the Steelers in 2021. And I know they just won the Super Bowl, but we're talking about a transition from, they went from Doug Peterson to Nick Sirianni, a new coach. They went from Carson Wentz to Jalen Hurts. They realized that changes needed to be made. Now, they still had some dudes like Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Darius Slay, who's now with the Steelers, another veteran addition to Pittsburgh this year. The Steelers realized they needed to make changes, and the patience might not be there for somebody like a TJ Watt or a Cam Hayward. How many years do they have left? Prime years. I mean, Cam Hayward somehow is still ageless, still playing at a very high level, maybe the best at his position. He's definitely in the conversation. I don't care what the top 100 says, what they rank him, like 87 or whatever I just saw. It's malarkey and not Mike. Talk about offensive coordinators too with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Arthur Smith in his second year, they realized he had to do something different. There had to be some change. Is change always a good thing? Ben Roethlisberger was eventually going to retire. We realized that, late years Ben, he still had some of that magic. He still had that come from behind moxie. But they changed from Todd Haley as offensive coordinator to Randy Fichtner, Ben's buddy. That worked until it didn't. All of a sudden, running the football was, well, short passes are runs in Randy Fichtner's book. And then you got Matt Canada. Enough said about Matt Canada. The best thing that happened with Matt Canada is when Matt Canada actually left and Mike Sullivan and Eddie Faulkner did the job on a coordinator interim basis until Arthur Smith came last year. Now Arthur Smith being there with some familiarity, but the Steelers are still clawing and biting. I got to get a drink here. My apologies. Sometimes just by myself. I've got this, I don't even know what coffee I got today. Drop in the comments. I'm curious. Brian doesn't like the brown hot sludge. I do a lot of K-Cups. I have a whole bunch of them. I got from Flavored, but my daily drivers are the Donut Shop, and it's no endorsement, just the regular Donut Shop. It was cheap. I kind of like it on occasion, and just some Italian sweet cream, but I believe this is this was Caribou. I got Caribou today. So let me know what you like. Jumping back into this, I like the cinnamon roll and the Snickers as far as the flavored. There's some very good coffees. Then there's some stuff that's just like, and I don't get too picky. There's some places, I like hotels, where maybe I might be a little more pickier about my coffee. But Ben Roethlisberger, obviously, it's the biggest storyline for the Steelers has been since his retirement and walking away from the team. The Steelers continue to make significant changes at the position. When he left, it was Mitch Trubisky, and they drafted Kenny Pickett. Mason Rudolph, to my opinion here, still hasn't been given the most fair shot at ever proving that he could be the guy. Coming in as a second-year player, having never taken a snap and having no quarterbacks coach, with Randy Fichtner as your offensive coordinator and all the other problems that Ben had to deal with, Dante Moncrief, doesn't say that that's your chance. We saw him in late 2023. He's back after a year away. The Steelers wiped that slate completely clean, because last year they went and did that too. They went and brought in Russell Wilson. They brought in Justin Fields and Kyle Allen, and they found out that Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are often their own worst enemy. They hold on to the ball forever, don't necessarily make the reads that they need to make. I guess Russell Wilson maybe changed plays or did some things off script that were frowned upon. That might have been to the detriment of this team having a 5-game skid at the end of the year. They found out they needed to change things on both sides of the football. Everything except for Chris Boswell. You had a TJ Watt that was running around, probably hurt for the last month of the year. Remember when he got hurt and you're like, oh, geez, he's not going to be on the field. I'm not actually sure if a hurt TJ Watt was better than maybe having Nick Herbig or somebody out there. they had some issues, and they're making an overhaul. But the quarterback deal, once again, is to retread and have a veteran, a former Super Bowl winning quarterback, once again, who was on the backside of his career at 41 years of age, Aaron Rodgers. I have said plenty throughout all of our offseason podcasts about Aaron Rodgers. I'm not trying to be anti-Aaron Rodgers. I defended Mason Rudolph because it's the devil you don't know. The devil you might know with Aaron Rodgers is he was a great player who doesn't turn the ball over. 4-time former MVP. Does he still have that magic at age 41? Don't know. Father Time's undefeated. That's the main question mark. He's come in for like a song, like $13 million and then some incentives. So I don't necessarily, I'm not going to begrudge anything with Aaron Rodgers necessarily until I get to see him play. He could be a fit. He could be part of the missing component. Is he going to get rid of the ball faster than Wilson or Fields? Maybe help an offensive line in development? Possibly. Talk about offensive line here in one moment, since I was already talking about Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu. But Mason Rudolph, I think a capable backup. I think Mason at some point, if he's a smart, bright guy that he appears to be, he may have coaching in his future, like a Kellen Moore and some of these other dudes that have been around the league as a backup and have played under so many different coordinators and great head coaches and also great quarterbacks. Mason Rudolph, playing under Ben, playing alongside Aaron Rodgers, probably just a wealth of knowledge. And I do feel that Mason is a guy, when called upon, you could do worse. The guy comes in cold and plays pretty good. I just want to see him warm, like full week's worth of practice, full month's worth of prep, a full training camp, stuff like that. Could his ceiling elevate, or is he just the backup that everybody's just like, well, you're just relegated to backup? Nothing wrong with being a backup either. Need quarterbacks in the NFL. That's why the Steelers took Will Howard, national champion from OHIO, the Ohio State Buckeyes. 6th rounder. Everybody just passed on this guy because he has 1 year with Ohio State, which was a crazy juggernaut of talent. Jeremiah Smith and all of the other wide receivers, Emeka Ibuka, the running backs, Travion Henderson, and Quinshawn Judkins, and the offensive line, just all that talent. You have Ryan Day as the head coach there. You have Chip Kelly as an offensive coordinator. And I know Will Howard played at Kansas State before this, and there's mixed thoughts about all this and transfer portal, this and that. You never know. I mean, there's Tom Brady who went to that other place up north during his college days. It is very much a long shot, but you give him a year to sit behind somebody like, pick the brain of a Mason Rudolph who's been around of different systems, different coaches, different quarterbacks, Hall of Fame level quarterbacks. And then you've got Aaron Rodgers. And if Aaron Rodgers is very sincere in what he says about maybe this is his last year, maybe he's got a chip on his shoulder and something to prove, will the change be good for the Pittsburgh Steelers? If it's a pissed off Aaron Rodgers that's like, I'm playing my old division, I'm playing my former team from last year, the New York Jets, they're all on this schedule, and I'm with my new team, I'm going to really show them. And if he's also, got the same bug up his ass like I think he did with Green Bay, drafting Jordan Love, oh, geez, they just put an expiration on my career here with the Packers. I'd be pissed off too if I have to look over my shoulder. In fact, if they went to hire my replacement at a job and they're like, well, train this guy, but you're done in 2 weeks, show them everything you know. No. So, I mean, I could get if Aaron Rodgers has some like diva tendencies like that, where he doesn't want to be a mentor. Yeah. I mean, who does? Who would want to be put in that situation? Now, it may be a little more different. He's probably like, I'm 41. I have a year left at least. Depending on how this goes, maybe I come back next year, maybe I don't. But you know what? It may be more of a stamp on my legacy if this next guy gets developed and learns a few things from me. Maybe he'll show a few things, but for the most part, there's some things that are non-transferable, right? You're not going to find the next big Ben Roethlisberger. Maybe Will Howard watches some video. Maybe Mike Tomlin tells some stories about how Ben didn't go down too easily, was hard to tackle, was hard to sack. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But Aaron Rodgers, maybe he could show you these quarterbacks a thing or two about reading coverages. Is he allowed to make adjustments? Is Arthur Smith going to impose his system, or is he going to bend to what Rodgers is best at doing? Or will it be a mix? And does that transfer over to Howard or Rudolph if they end up having to play? I think so. I think those guys will play more from the pocket. I don't think that Rodgers is as elusive as he once was. I mean, he's not going to be quick, but he's not going to be maybe plodding around like Ben was either. So change. Wow. I mean, we're talking about Ben. We're talking about 2021. But I mean, just change over the years. Has it been good? The Steelers haven't been stuck with trading, multiple first-round draft picks, 3 to be exact, and some other picks and swaps of position, and to the Houston Texans for a player that then doesn't really play, hurt, probably isn't going to play this year, but has settled them with a huge, $250 million contract with all the guaranteed money. Of course, I'm talking about Deshaun Watson. And it's easy to pick on the Browns. They're another division opponent of the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're in the AFC North. I love to pick on the Browns, but they're not the only ones who make these kind of mistakes, throw too much money at a quarterback and then it fails. In fact, I remember, speaking of the Texans, remember when they signed Brock Osweiler to like 4 years, 70-some million, which was a big amount of money back then. Steelers aren't making those same kind of mistakes. I know they may be looking at the quarterback position again next year, but for this year, are these changes a good thing? I feel what was working, what was or wasn't working last year, it worked until it didn't. Russell Wilson's still one of my favorite players, but maybe his time's up too. It's sometimes the bloom just comes off the flower. So some guys last longer than others. You just got to be able to admit that himself. I think he's still got that chip too, and we'll see how he works up in New York. We'll see if the Steelers were right or the Steelers were wrong. I don't know. Denver seems to be pretty vindicated by doing all of that right now. Change sometimes can be good. Sometimes change can be bad. I know people are going to talk about Mike Tomlin, the chemistry with this team, all of these new additions that they're bringing on. I think the reason you get Aaron Rodgers, or you're able to get players that might have a little more say when it comes to, free agency or trades or whatever, and you get them to come to Pittsburgh, is a large part because of Mike Tomlin, his personality and his coaching style. Too many people, Terry Bradshaw has said it. He's talked about Tomlin being a cheerleader. He's not there. He doesn't know 100% of the way. I don't think everybody can just get in someone's ass and be a dictator either. That's why Bill Belichick's no longer in New England. And I know they made that change. Was that for better or worse? No, it looks like it's for worse. They used to be competitive in that league when all the other 3 teams weren't, with the Jets, Bills, and Dolphins. Now those teams are, at least 2 of them, the Bills and the Dolphins, whenever they're at full strength, are competitive. In New England's like now a bottom feeder, and they're already on their second run of a different coach after saying goodbye. So some of these things, change is good, some of it's change is bad. Steelers are going to stay consistent. Does that mean they stay mediocre? Not necessarily. Some of the problems were on defense too, and we got that overhaul. But before I go over to them, again, the offensive line I think is a big question mark. Is change good? Broderick Jones, they traded up to get him a couple of years ago, but he hasn't been able to play left tackle. He's been stuck on the right because of various injuries and things that have been going on with the Steelers offensive line. If he gets over to the left side, some guys can't do both. You're specialized, or you've just become ingrained in playing that one role. Maybe Jones is a stud at left tackle. There's a hope that he's at least an average to above average player. We know that Isaac Seumalo, Zach Frazier, these guys look like they're very, going to be good. If they don't have a chance to be great, they just hold up and they keep their trajectory going. You just got to hope that one or both of these tackles plays at least steady level play. I'm not sure about the guard with Mason McCormick. It's not much of a change, but they drafted him last year. He got thrown in right away. When James Daniels got hurt, James Daniels now in Miami. It just seems like everybody, like Miami and Pittsburgh, are just playing musical chairs with some of their players so far this offseason. But Troy Fautanu looked very bright for a game, and he was coming in and out. I know Broderick Jones got penalized a few times. There was a lot of pressure on Broderick Jones. We'll see what happens with the big man this year. Maybe just as much pressure, maybe Troy Fautanu, but now, he's not necessarily just a first-round pick that's going to be expected to start right out the gate, whatever. He's had a year to kind of sit and do this, all the stuff that I was talking about with Will Howard, but as an offensive tackle. It's going to be huge, though. And I say, like, if one of these guys falters or whatnot, you've got at least 2 tight ends that could catch the football, nice targets for Aaron Rodgers. You got John L. Smith here. I talk about Pat Freiermuth, who's still a carryover. I know some people are like, well, if they would have went with like Creed Humphrey instead of Pat Freiermuth, well, that pick still would have worked out. It just would probably be looking for another tight end. Steelers been looking for tight ends forever. We'll see if they use 3. They bring out Darnell Washington. I think they could use him some more. Like half his catches went for first downs. He's hard to tackle. He's hard to bring down. You just got to have somebody that can deliver him the ball, and they got to be able to give him the opportunities. He may be out there if you need somebody to help chip with Fatanu or Jones, or just, your jumbo packages. Just one thing though, like a big guy like that, you got to have him to have the expectation to play forward, get your body on somebody, it not be a pick play and then release. And some of that's like timing. Aaron Rodgers might put that ball on a rope and be able to do that better than the previous quarterbacks. Maybe the change is good. Maybe the change is good for Freiermuth. Maybe the change is good for Darnell Washington. I look at maybe even Connor Hayward, who I was talking about earlier. Does he have longer than a 4-year career in the NFL? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on, he's a special teams player. He's a utility guy that might fit into just what Arthur Smith might want to do. But you got all these tight ends. You got all these guys I was talking about. Of course, in the backfield, you got Jaylen Warren. Maybe it changed to being more of a split or a full-time workload. Is he a true 3-down back? I don't know. I don't know if he holds up that long. He's had some ball security issues, as has Kenneth Gainwell in the past. Kenneth Gainwell is not the kind of guy that plods around and is going to break tackles like a Najee Harris. So Caleb Johnson, rookie from Iowa. You got some stuff counting on some draft picks. Some draft picks have to hit, but so do these other moves. Letting go of George Pickens, you got to have Calvin Austin or Roman Wilson step into this spot. We don't know. Roman Wilson is a complete unknown. Austin was starting to extend into a wide receiver 2 territory, although I don't know that the Steelers really had wide receiver 1 numbers from anyone. Pat Freiermuth flirts with being having the most receptions or the most yards, or at least the second most on the team. Same with scoring with his 7 touchdowns. I believe it was 7 last year, 6 or 7. It's been pretty consistent for him. It's pretty decent tight end play. It's not fantasy numbers, but then again, for those of you who play fantasy football, most tight ends don't put up fantasy numbers for the most part. But DK Metcalf is the big guy on campus now, coming over from the Seattle Seahawks, 28 years old, in his prime. He is a physical specimen, a bona fide guy that can play a wide receiver 1 role. So if any of the other guys can contribute, whether that comes from Smith and Freiermuth to help offset for an Austin or Wilson, you still got Robert Woods. He's like 33 years old. Probably going to be a special teams guy, a returner. We'll see how that works out. I liked Robert Woods a lot over the years. His problem had usually been health, but if he's not playing like 70% or more of the snaps, that might bode well for somebody that age. He's still got the tricks of the trade too. He's going to know when to come out of certain breaks, certain things with footwork, certain things that aren't established only by speed. Like if you remember Antonio Brown, not necessarily the fastest guy off the line of scrimmage, but he could shake you out of your boots and he could get open. He could get free. And then once he did, goodbye. See you later. A little different from Martavis Bryant, who was just the Flash, not Zach Celadonia, our other co-host. So, enjoying the caribou here. The receiver overhaul. Is it a good thing? I don't know. It looked like it was going to be a good pairing, but when you have with George Pickens pairing up with DK Metcalf, but I saw this with Chase Claypool too in the past. Just give up on plays. Deontay Johnson, just give up on plays. George had a little bit of that within his tendencies too, as we saw. Debatable on how serious his injuries were at one point last season, where he got put on the bench. Might have been disciplinary, and they were using that as an excuse. Maybe it was a mix of both. But you take one play off, and we see a lot of football games are decided in 5 plays or fewer. That's what ends up happening. That's all the more it takes. One play goes wrong, Russell Wilson throws an interception, Aaron Rodgers throws an interception. Maybe George just might have been better off, not being with the Steelers, and they sell high and they get something from him. Again, the running back role, Najee Harris gone. You got maybe a larger role for Jaylen Warren. He's a hell of a pass protector. And we'll see what Caleb Johnson can do. Caleb Johnson appears to have all the tools to be a 3-down back as well. he might have some Le'Veon Bell type tendencies. He going to catch the football also? Remember, Bell used to be, he wanted wide receiver 2 money. Change could be a good thing. It wasn't maybe post Bell, although James Conner, if he could have stayed healthy, James Conner he's still a dude. We shall see. A little different than Benny Snell. I was looking at that 2021 roster. Oh my goodness. You look at the wide receivers, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, James Washington, Ray McLeod. It's not forever. And then Juju was on this team also. Juju came back. He played 5 games that year. So I remember everyone was all like up in arms over Kalen Ballage, who saw how many carries? 12? It just goes to show you, it's not always what you think on paper. Defensively, you know, the Steelers, they had, who do I want to all put on here? Obviously, Minkah Fitzpatrick in 2021. If you remember, Joe Schobert, Terrell Edmonds, Cam was still there, Alex Highsmith. In his second year, Devin Bush, TJ Watt, Robert Spillane, Cam Sutton, who actually came back last year, Chris Wormley, James Pierre still hanging out, Arthur Millette, Joe Hayden. It's the not forever league. I forgot Taco Charleston. Cannot say his name. Taco Charlton was even a part of this roster for a short minute. A guy that's like Akella Witherspoon, Justin Lane. He's just like, to most people, they're like, wow, that was just terrible. You wouldn't have been able to keep all of those guys to 2025. Some of them are going to age out. Some of them are just going to flame out. Some of them aren't going to pan out. Even you got a couple of them that, you know, Alex Highsmith, for example, hung around and have done well. So maybe change is good. And the Steelers needed some change on the defensive side of things this season. We're talking about chemistry. Jalen Ramsey. You've got Darius Slay also in this mix with Joey Porter. Some people are really getting on Joey Porter. Yeah, he had his hands full against the Bengals. Aside from the Bengals, though, I didn't think he had a bad season. To be honest, getting somebody like Slay or Ramsey in there with a young Porter, he's going to learn a lot. And Porter won't just be your number one guy now in that secondary. He's good enough to be a number one guy potentially. But he's definitely at least a 2 or a 1.5. Holy cow. The Steelers just got tired of not being able to stop other teams. And a lot of that was, again, like I say, playing musical chairs, doing all these different rotations on defense. Jalen Ramsey should be a guy that's on the field 100% of the time. You're going to be able to move him around anywhere. And if you remember Cam Sutton playing safety, Joe Hayden sometimes would fill in on the back end of that defense, depending on the coverages and schemes. Terrell Austin is still the defensive coordinator, for better or worse. Has changed a good thing. I don't know. I don't think they get to the quarterback as much as they used to with Keith Butler, but some of that comes as a risk. The more guys you send after the quarterback, that's the more one-on-one coverages or fewer guys to put a hat on a hat. You might play some zone, but Jalen Ramsey's going to be a man-to-man guy. He's going to press. He's going to press at the line of scrimmage. He's capable of getting his nose in there. He's capable of helping stop the run. Maybe some stuff that you couldn't get out of just Dante Jackson, or, you know, you're stretching Minkah around. I don't have a bad thing to say about Minkah other than I think his contract may have priced him out of Pittsburgh, especially with the lack of splash plays over the last 2 seasons. And some of that is just maybe by assignment too. Maybe just didn't fit what they wanted to do. They bring in Juan Thornhill. I thought maybe just as a reserve replacing KZ. Maybe Thornhill's just a guy that, you know, played with the Chiefs, those Super Bowl teams there under Andy Reid, and Steve Spagnuolo. Great defensive coordinator. Maybe he's somebody that brings a wealth of knowledge and experience and won't be a liability on that backside. Of course, Deshaun Elliott gets the brand new contract. You pair them guys up with Porter, with Ramsey, with Slay. Ramsey could even fill in and slide back. He could go toe-to-toe with some tight ends. He's going to help man up. I mean, you saw what the Ravens are doing, the arms race. They get Jair Alexander, right? They add him. Marlon Humphrey's been playing in the slot. They have Nate Wiggins, who was a recent draft pick, I think maybe 2 seasons ago out of Clemson. And then they also have wide receivers also. They're doing that against the Bengals. They're looking at the Bengals. They're looking at Jamar Chase, and they're looking at T. Higgins. And how can we, line up against that? But at the same time, the Steelers not only have to think about the Bengals, they have to think about the Ravens, who have Zay Flowers, who have DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, I think is still over there. I'm trying to think, who else did they have? Hopefully I got that right. I haven't gone into the deep dive on the AFC North rosters yet until they get to camp. So, but this is certainly a move that the Steelers made to do that. But they also have to stop guys like Derrick Henry up front. Cleveland Browns have been running the football exceptionally well over the last few seasons. You got to be able to beat the teams in your division. Browns are probably going to run the ball a lot based on who they have as their quarterbacks. I know they got Jerry Jeudy, maybe not much of anything else, maybe some other young wide receivers. Maybe it won't give as much trouble, but when you have that great coverage on the backside, you might not have to double a Jamar Chase. You might not have to double a DeAndre Hopkins. You can just put Ramsey on him, put Slay on him, put Porter on him. Porter can get handsy, but you know what? He gets a flag thrown at him because he grabs a guy to not give up a touchdown. Then it's not a decline penalty because it's not a catch, and you give up whatever. I don't want to see that all the time. Because it doesn't mean I don't want to be thinking he's getting beat all the time. But if it happens here or there, it's actually a smart play versus just, this guy's bad or something. So people getting on that horse, I don't like with Porter. But being able to stop the run game as part of this too. And like I said, Ramsey will get his nose in there. Elliott definitely does. Thornhill will as well. And then you've got the rest of that front seven. You've got Watt. You've got Highsmith. You've got Cam Hayward. Keanu Benton is a guy that I have loved since he's come out of Wisconsin. And I think he's really going to mature into a role with the Steelers. We'll see if he's playing any nose tackle. We'll see if the draft pick from Oregon this year, Derek Harmon, what his role is going to be. I believe he's a full 5 technique as well. Maybe Benton plays a little nose, but we're not going to see a whole lot of nose. We're going to see that 4-man front. That's a combo of, pretty much the stalwarts are Watt and Highsmith with Hayward and probably Benton to start since he's the elder now in place of Larry Ogunjobi, who he wasn't getting the job done. Anybody else they had in there wasn't getting the job done. Patrick Queen as your linebacker. Cole Holcomb, he was meant to be a captain and a play caller 2 years ago, missed all of last season. Takes a, reduced contract, had that restructured so he could return. If he comes back at full pace, holy cow, and you still got Peyton Wilson there floating around. This isn't like putting a Landon Roberts out there and then you're like, well, we'll line this guy up. We know he can't cover him. And you end up with some mismatches on the field because you have players that are only specialized to playing on certain downs. And I'm not just talking about giving somebody a breather. You've got 3 legitimate inside linebackers who go sideline to sideline. You've also got guys who could give Watt and Highsmith a blow. You've got Nick Herbig and potentially Jack Sawyer also. We'll see how much playing time Jack Sawyer ends up getting. I'm excited to see him in training camp as well. This Steelers defense has got me real excited. I'm going to start doing some comparisons to see what they look like, versus even last year's team. But just talking about some of the players that were there 2020. We know the Steelers started 11-0, in 2020, 2021. I was looking back at that roster. It's exciting times. We'll see what they could do with a veteran quarterback, but is change a good thing? They had to make some changes. They haven't won a playoff game since they made the AFC title game in 2016. Back then, we were riding pretty high. We went into 2017 with like 13 wins to play the Jacksonville Jaguars, hosting a home game after a bye. Man, Steelers fans are missing that. And I know I am too. And trust me, it doesn't mean wipe the slate incredibly clean. We've seen Tom Brady bring a few guys with him, and there's some small tweaks in Tampa Bay, and boom, that foundation was good enough to compete for a Super Bowl. I just mentioned the Eagles, adding some youth, making some trades, making a signing here or there, playing with a cheap quarterback. They were able to do the same thing and compete and be a very competitive team over the last few seasons. So let's see if the Pittsburgh Steelers are in that same category. Folks, thank you for watching or listening wherever you may be. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For those of you watching the video version of this podcast, next day availability on Spotify. Till next time, I'll get my colleagues back. We'll be talking about some other fun Steelers stuff as well. But until then, as we always sign off on this show, my name is Joe Kuzma, and I always encourage our viewers and listeners out there to be safe, be good, and I'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.